They tore my dress and laughed like I was a joke. I thought no one would ever stand up for me until the man they all feared arrived, my brother, and that day, under the bright sun, every secret they hid came crashing down. If you've ever been humiliated for being humble, this story will shake you. Stay till the end, because when love turns into power and silence turns into justice, even the mighty learn what real strength looks like. It was one of those mornings that looked like a dream from the outside, sunlight spilling through silk canopies, violins tuning softly, waiters rushing across marble floors. Everything shimmered gold and white, every flower perfectly placed. To everyone else, it was the wedding of the year. But to me, it was work, and a reminder of everything I had once lost. My name is Aliyah Knight, and that day, I was managing the biggest event of my career, my estranged family's wedding. The bride was Clarissa, my father's second wife's daughter, my stepsister, the one who grew up in the mansion that was once my home. I had been forced to leave years ago after my stepmother, Evelyn, convinced my father that I was ungrateful and unworthy of his wealth. When he passed away, everything, the estate, the company, even the family name, went to her and her precious daughter. I built my life from nothing, started as an intern carrying flowers, and now I was the woman trusted to make elite weddings happen. Irony, right? I was planning the same kind of life they said I'd never belong to. I arrived early that day, dressed in a soft peach gown with my hair tied neatly back. It wasn't designer, but it was clean and elegant. I could feel the stares the moment I stepped into the garden. The guests, women draped in diamonds and perfume worth more than my monthly pay, looked at me like I didn't belong. Their whispers brushed against the air like poison. "Who is she?" one asked. "Probably some helper," another replied, her voice drenched in mock pity. I smiled politely and kept walking. I had learned long ago that silence hurts arrogance more than words ever could. As I walked past the fountain, I saw Evelyn, my stepmother, standing near the stage, giving orders as if she were the queen of the world. Our eyes met for a brief second. She froze, her smile stiffening. I could almost see the thought crossing her mind, that I shouldn't have been there, that I was still supposed to be beneath them. "Well," she said in her honeyed tone, "I hope you don't ruin anything, Aliyah. This event is very delicate." Her voice carried the same fake sweetness she used when she ruined my life. I nodded and simply replied, "I don't ruin things. I fix them." Clarissa walked in soon after, radiant in her ivory gown, surrounded by bridesmaids and photographers. When she saw me arranging the flowers, she smirked. "Still working with flowers?" "How poetic," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. I didn't respond. I just adjusted the bouquet she'd criticized and moved on. As the guests arrived, I stood quietly near the aisle, making sure everything was perfect. The music began and applause filled the air, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. A storm, not the kind that ruins weddings, but the kind that reveals truths. I didn't know it yet, but this wedding, the one meant to show their power and pride, was about to expose everything they'd buried, and I was standing right in the center of it. The ceremony was supposed to be a celebration of love, but to me, it felt like a stage built on lies. The guests laughed too loud, their smiles too polished. Every glance I caught carried judgment, as if my plain dress and clipboard were offenses against their glittering world. But I kept my head high and focused on my job. I'd promised myself I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I was checking the seating arrangements near the garden arch when it began. A group of Clarissa's friends, women who looked like they were born to destroy others for sport, approached me. One of them, a tall blonde with cold eyes, tilted her glass and said, "Excuse me, are you the florist or the maid?" Her tone was dripping with amusement. I gave her a polite smile and answered softly, "Neither. I'm the event coordinator." They laughed, all of them. The sound was cruel, sharp enough to cut through the music playing nearby. "An event coordinator in that dress?" another mocked. "Sweetheart, did you borrow it from a thrift shop?" I wanted to walk away, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I reminded myself, stay calm, stay professional. People like them feed on reactions, but they didn't stop. One of them accidentally bumped into me, spilling champagne down my shoulder. The cold liquid soaked through my fabric, and the crowd nearby chuckled as if it were part of the entertainment. "Oh no," she said dramatically. "Maybe she can't afford another dress." They laughed harder this time. I took a deep breath, forcing myself not to cry. I grabbed a napkin and dabbed at the stain, whispering, "It's fine." But before I could step away, Clarissa appeared, pretending to look concerned. "Oh dear, what happened here?" she asked, voice dripping with fake sympathy. Her friends snickered behind her. "Poor Aaliyah," one said. "Maybe we should give her one of our old gowns. Wouldn't that be kind?" Clarissa's smirk deepened. No, she replied sweetly. "This is who she is." Always trying to fit in where she doesn't belong. Then she leaned closer to me, her perfume heavy and suffocating. "You should have stayed in your little world, Aaliyah. This one was never meant for you." Something inside me cracked, but I didn't break. I looked at her, not as the bride everyone adored, but as the girl who'd stolen my place in our father's heart. My silence seemed to annoy her because she suddenly grabbed my scarf and tugged at it, pretending it was an accident. The others joined in, laughing louder, and before I knew it, one of them pulled at my dress so hard that the fabric tore near my shoulder. Gasps echoed around us. Guests turned. Phones came up. Someone even started recording. I felt heat rush to my face, humiliation burning through me like fire. I wanted to vanish, but I couldn't move. Clarissa smiled victoriously, whispering, "Now you look exactly where you belong, beneath us." Tears filled my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Somewhere deep down, a voice reminded me that dignity isn't in silence or shouting. It's in knowing your worth when the world tries to strip it away. I didn't know it yet, but help was already on the way. Someone had seen everything. Someone who would make them regret every cruel laugh they dared to throw at me. I walked away from that crowd with trembling hands and a pounding heart. Every laugh still echoed in my ears, sharp and humiliating. I ducked behind the tent near the catering section, trying to breathe, trying to stop the shaking in my chest. My torn dress clung to my skin, sticky with champagne, but I couldn't bring myself to fix it. The pain wasn't just from their cruelty. It was from the memory of every time I'd been told I wasn't good enough. I leaned against a table and whispered to myself, "You're fine, Aaliyah." You've survived worse, but that day, the humiliation had gone too far. I could hear the guests still laughing in the distance, their music and clinking glasses blending with my silence. And in that moment, I made a quiet promise. No matter what happened, I wouldn't let them see me broken. Unseen by me, one of the catering staff, an older man named Samuel who had worked for my family since my childhood, had watched everything. His face was pale with anger and disbelief. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands and made a call. I didn't hear his words, but later I would learn what he said. "Sir, it's Aaliyah. They're hurting her again. You need to come." On the other end of that call was Adrian Knight, my brother, the man the world knew as a ruthless, brilliant CEO. But to me, he was the boy who once used to sneak cookies into my room when Evelyn locked me out of the dining hall. We hadn't spoken in months, not since I refused to use his influence to build my business. I wanted to prove myself. I didn't want to be the CEO's sister. But at that moment, miles away, he didn't care about our distance. He only heard one word echoing in his mind, Aaliyah. While I tried to compose myself, wiping my tears with the back of my hand, I noticed Samuel watching me from afar. He gave me a small nod, a look that said, "It's okay now." I didn't understand it then, but something in his eyes felt reassuring, as if he knew something I didn't. Back in the garden, Clarissa continued her charade, smiling for cameras, pretending nothing had happened. The women who tore my dress whispered proudly about how putting that girl in her place felt satisfying. Evelyn laughed with the guests, raising her glass high as if celebrating a victory. But the wind began to shift. I remember it so clearly. a sudden quiet, the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath. One of the waiters dropped a tray, startled by the sound of engines outside the gates. I turned instinctively toward the road. From the distance, a line of black luxury cars rolled down the gravel driveway, sunlight flashing across their tinted windows. Conversations fell silent. Guests began to look around, uncertain. Clarissa frowned and whispered, "Who's that?" Evelyn tried to wave it off, but her smile faltered. Something in the air changed. Heavy, electric, almost trembling. I didn't know yet that my brother was in one of those cars, calm, silent, furious. But I could feel it in my chest, that the balance was about to shift. The same people who laughed at me were seconds away from meeting the man who would make them regret it. As I stood there, still in my torn dress, I took a deep breath. I didn't know if I was ready for what was coming, but for the first time that day, I wasn't afraid. Something told me that the storm arriving at those gates wasn't here to destroy me. It was here to save me. The sound of engines grew louder until it swallowed the laughter and music entirely. Guests began whispering, their polished faces twisting in curiosity. I stood still, my heart thudding as I watched the sleek black cars come to a stop by the grand archway. The air felt charged, heavy, like the calm before thunder. Then the doors opened. From the first car stepped out a man in a light gray suit, tall, composed, with the kind of presence that made people lower their voices without knowing why. Adrian Knight, my brother, my protector, my reminder that silence can carry more power than 1,000 words. For a moment I couldn't move. It felt surreal, almost like a dream I'd imagined on one of my loneliest nights. He hadn't changed. The sharp jawline, the steady eyes, the same air of authority that could stop an entire boardroom mid-sentence. But this wasn't his office. This was my battlefield, and he'd just stepped into it. The guests turned as whispers rippled through the crowd. "That's Adrian Knight. Isn't he the billionaire from Knight Enterprises?" someone murmured. "What's he doing here?" another whispered. I saw Evelyn's glass slip slightly in her hand. Clarissa froze halfway through a laugh, her confidence crumbling in seconds. Adrian's steps were measured, not rushed, not hesitant, just controlled, deliberate. Every movement said one thing. He wasn't there to talk. He was there to end something. He stopped near the main aisle, his gaze sweeping over the crowd until it landed on me. For a second, the world went quiet. No music, no chatter, just his eyes meeting mine. When he saw my torn dress, his jaw tightened. That was the only crack in his calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply took off his gray coat and walked toward me. The crowd parted for him as if they already knew better than to stand in his way. He reached me, gently draping the coat over my shoulders. His voice was low but carried through the air like a command. "Not another word against my sister." That single sentence cut through every ounce of arrogance that filled that garden. You could feel the shame settle in, heavy and suffocating. The women who had mocked me stepped back. Clarissa stammered, Adrian, this isn't what it looks like." He turned his gaze toward her, calm and cold. "No," he said, "it's exactly what it looks like." Then his attention shifted to Evelyn, who was trying to regain her composure. "Still teaching your daughter how to humiliate others for sport?" he asked. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The guests watched in silence, too stunned to speak. Adrian then faced the crowd and said evenly, "You've all seen enough to know who the real disgrace is here. I came here because someone reminded me what this family had turned into. But today, that ends." His tone wasn't angry, it was resolute, controlled, the kind of calm that makes even powerful people tremble. He looked at me again, his expression softening just slightly. "You shouldn't have had to endure this, Aaliyah," he said quietly. "Not again. Not ever." For the first time in years, I felt safe. His words weren't loud, but they were everything. It wasn't just my brother who had arrived. It was justice walking in on polished shoes. Around us, whispers grew into uneasy silence. Cameras stopped recording. Every person who had laughed at me now stood frozen, realizing the man they had mocked indirectly was one of the most feared and respected figures in the business world. As Adrian turned to leave, he simply said, "This event is over." And just like that, the wedding that was meant to display their power became the day their pride was shattered. The silence that followed Adrian's words was deafening. It was the kind of stillness that carried weight, the kind that made even the proudest people realize they'd gone too far. I could feel everyone's eyes darting between us, between the humiliated, simple girl they had mocked and the man whose name commanded entire industries. Adrian didn't shout or demand attention. He didn't need to. His very presence rewrote the tone of the event. Clarissa's laughter had died completely. Her face was pale beneath layers of expensive makeup. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. Adrian," she stuttered, "please, you're misunderstanding everything." But my brother raised a single hand, silencing her effortlessly. "Enough," he said softly, yet his voice carried like thunder. "You humiliated your own blood for amusement. You let your guests rip her dignity apart in front of cameras." His gaze flicked toward Evelyn, who stood a few feet behind Clarissa, pretending to be innocent. "And you," he continued, "you raised her to believe cruelty was a sign of power. Tell me, Evelyn, how's that working out for you?" Evelyn's face flushed crimson. "Adrian, this is a private family matter." He interrupted sharply. "A family matter? You stopped being family the day you stole from our father's trust." The crowd gasped. My breath caught. I hadn't known he would bring that up, the secret I'd buried for years. Adrian turned toward the large LED screen meant for the wedding slideshow and gestured to one of his assistants, who had quietly appeared behind him. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of documents, legal papers, transaction records, and bank statements. "This," he said, his voice cold and steady, "is proof that Evelyn and her daughter transferred assets meant for my sister into shell accounts. Money that rightfully belonged to Aaliyah." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Guests who had come to gossip now watched in stunned silence. The truth unfolded like a blade slicing through their illusion of perfection. Clarissa's hands shook as she whispered, "You can't prove that." Adrian didn't even look at her. "Already did," he replied calmly. "You signed them." He pulled out one final document and held it up, a deed stamped and notarized. "And as of this morning, this estate is no longer in your name." His voice didn't waver. "It belongs to Aaliyah Knight, the rightful heir to her father's legacy." The color drained from Clarissa's face. The microphone she had held for her wedding vows fell to the ground, the feedback screeching through the speakers. Evelyn swayed as if her world had shattered in an instant. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to process what was happening. For years I'd imagined justice, but never like this, never so public, so final. My brother turned toward me then, his eyes softening just enough to let me see the warmth beneath the steel. "This," he said gently, "was never about revenge. It was about giving you back what they stole, your dignity, your name, your peace." The crowd broke into murmurs, some shocked, others ashamed. The same guests who had mocked my simplicity now looked at me with quiet awe, as if realizing that grace had always been stronger than pride. Clarissa, shaking, whispered, "Adrian, please, this is my wedding." Adrian's reply was calm and devastating. "No, Clarissa. This was your stage, and it just became your downfall." He turned to the security team stationed near the gates. "Escort them off the property." As the guards approached, Clarissa's friends, the ones who had torn my dress and laughed, began slipping away, suddenly silent, no longer bold without their queen. Evelyn tried to protest, but her words fell apart in sobs. I stood there, wrapped in my brother's coat, watching the same people who had stripped me of dignity now stripped of their illusion of power. For the first time in years, I felt a strange stillness in my chest. Not anger, not pride, just peace. Adrian turned to me, his expression soft but resolute. "You don't need to thank me," he said quietly. "Just promise me one thing. Never let their cruelty define who you are again. I nodded, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. I won't, I whispered. Not anymore. And in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of their arrogance, I realized something profound. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in wearing a gray suit and speaks softly enough to change everything. The aftermath of Adrian's revelation spread like wildfire through the garden. You could feel the air shift, heavy, trembling, full of disbelief. Moments ago, people were sipping champagne and gossiping about luxury honeymoons. Now they stood frozen, clutching their glasses as if afraid to breathe. The empire of pride and lies that Clarissa and Evelyn had built for years was collapsing in front of everyone, and there was no saving it. Evelyn's voice broke through the tension, trembling but still desperate to hold control. "Adrian, please," she said, forcing a tearful smile. "You don't understand. I did what I had to do for my daughter. We were just protecting the family's legacy." Adrian turned toward her slowly, his calm almost cruel in its precision. "By stealing it from the only person who actually earned it?" His tone didn't rise, but each word hit harder than any scream could. "You turned legacy into leverage. You used my father's trust to fund your greed, and you dared to call it protection." Clarissa stepped forward, her voice shrill now. "Stop it! You can't humiliate us like this in front of everyone." Adrian's lips curved in a cold, restrained smile. "I'm not humiliating you," he said. "You did that to yourselves. I'm just removing the mask." Then, almost on cue, a few uniformed officers arrived at the gate, summoned not by chaos, but by Adrian's quiet efficiency. The guests moved aside as the officers approached. Adrian nodded once, and one of them handed him a folder. "The court order," the officer said. "Everything is officially transferred." Clarissa's voice cracked. "This is our home." Adrian's gaze was steady. "Correction, was." For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of the wind brushing through the curtains and the faint sobs of Evelyn. Clarissa sank onto the steps, holding her face, her makeup streaking down her cheeks. The same crowd that had cheered for her a few hours ago now stared at her like strangers. No one offered comfort. No one even spoke. Adrian walked to me, his presence grounding me in the storm. "You don't have to stay," he said gently. "You don't owe this place another second of your life." But I shook my head. "No," I whispered. "I need to see this." It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was closure. I wanted to see the truth stand taller than the lies that had buried me for years. Evelyn approached me slowly, her face pale, her voice trembling. "Aaliyah, I never meant—" I stopped her. "You meant every word you ever said," I replied quietly. "You made me believe I was nothing, and for a long time I almost believed you. But not anymore." Her tears came faster then, but I couldn't feel sympathy. My heart had already let her go. Adrian placed a hand on my shoulder, and together we turned away from them, leaving them with the same silence they once gave me. Behind us, the guests began to disperse. The music had stopped, the laughter gone. The perfect wedding had turned into a spectacle of truth. As we reached the driveway, I caught a glimpse of myself in one of the car windows, wrapped in my brother's coat, my hair messy, my makeup smudged. But for the first time, I saw strength in that reflection. The woman looking back at me wasn't broken anymore. Adrian opened the car door for me. "You know," he said softly, "I wasn't sure you'd want me to come." I smiled faintly through my tears. "You always show up when it matters." He nodded once. "And you always stand back up." We drove away as the estate shrank behind us, that grand golden prison that once held my pain. The world outside looked brighter, freer. And though I didn't say it aloud, one thought filled my heart completely. Their arrogance fell, but my dignity rose higher than it ever had before. The days that followed felt like waking from a long nightmare. The world outside seemed softer, the sunlight warmer, as if life itself had been waiting for me to reclaim it. The scandal from that wedding spread fast. News articles, social media posts, whispered conversations in business circles. But for once, my name wasn't being spoken with pity or shame. It carried respect. People didn't just see the simple girl anymore. They saw the woman who endured humiliation and rose with grace. I didn't hide from the headlines. I faced them. Each one was a reminder that silence hadn't made me weak. It had made my strength louder. When Adrian suggested that I take over the Knight Foundation's luxury events division, I hesitated at first. For so long I had fought to stand on my own without using his name. But this time, it wasn't about dependence. It was about ownership. I wasn't stepping into his shadow. I was walking beside it. A week later, I returned to the estate, the same place that once held my humiliation. But this time, everything felt different. The guards at the gate greeted me with respect. The flowers I had arranged for Clarissa's wedding were gone, replaced by fresh white lilies. Simple, elegant, strong, just like I wanted them. I walked through the garden where it had all happened. The laughter that once haunted me had been replaced by birdsong and quiet peace. That afternoon, I hosted my first charity luncheon under my new title. The guests weren't the rich socialites who lived for gossip and vanity. They were women like me, hardworking, overlooked, and underestimated. Some of them were single mothers trying to build small businesses. Others were young girls who had faced rejection. As I stood at the podium, I looked around and saw hope in their eyes, the kind I once thought I'd lost. I used to believe that being simple meant being small, I began, that you had to wear diamonds to be respected or stand in luxury to be seen. But I learned that true grace doesn't shine under chandeliers. It glows quietly in people who refuse to give up. Applause filled the air, but it wasn't the sound of victory. It was healing, for them and for me. When the event ended, I found Adrian waiting near the fountain, the same one where Evelyn once insulted me years ago. He stood with his hands in his pockets, smiling faintly. "You did well," he said. I smiled back. "We did well." He shook his head. "No, Aaliyah. You did this. You turned their cruelty into something that matters." I felt tears sting my eyes again, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from pride, not the arrogant kind, but the quiet one that blooms after surviving a storm. Before leaving, I turned to look at the mansion one last time. It no longer felt like a place of pain. It felt like proof that no matter how much they tried to bury me, I was meant to rise. As I walked toward the car, the late afternoon sun touched my face. I thought of that day, of the torn dress, the laughter, the humiliation, and I smiled softly. "They tried to break me in daylight," I whispered, but my truth rose brighter than the sun. In the distance, I heard Adrian's voice, calm, strong, and proud. "They thought you were alone, Aaliyah," he said. "They were wrong." And for the first time in my life, I believed it completely, because I finally understood that strength doesn't come from power, wealth, or titles. It comes from standing tall, even when your heart is broken, and walking forward anyway. That day, I didn't just reclaim my name. I reclaimed myself,